Good morning, everyone. I think we are ready to go. So thank you once again for joining us for the Kenya SLCP project webinar series. Today's webinar will be addressing vehicular pollutants and impacts on urban populations and the advantages of developing a baseline black carbon emissions inventory in Kenya. My name is Arnold Kipchumba, the project officer for the Kenya SLCP project. Before we proceed, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. So today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be able to share a link with you after the webinar. We also welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues. All attendees are also requested to mute their audio unless when asking questions. We also invite your comments and questions. So please look at the question and answer toolbox and chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at that time, just type it there and the moderator will either pose it to our speakers at that time or hold it for the discussion portion at the end of every plenary session. So great. So allow me to briefly give a background information about the Kenya SLCP project. So the Kenya SLCP project is a one-year project that aims to understand the scale and status of short-lived climate pollutants emissions, in particular black carbon, and the effect it has on air quality, climate change, and primarily women's health in Kenya. The broad objective of the project is to quantify the short-lived climate pollutants, again, in particular black carbon, on air quality, climate change, and household health issues in Kenya. However, for the purposes of this webinar, we will focus on the objective that seeks to model the spatial dispersal of vehicular emission pollutants and map populations at risk in Nairobi City County Government and Nakuru County. So the larger project is being implemented by Joyful Women, Kenya Meteorological Society, Friedrich Ebert Stiftag, who are mobilizing civil society organizations, the Council of Governors, representing subnational entities, with generous funding from Climate Works Foundation, which is a philanthropic organization based in San Francisco in the US. However, this component of the project focusing on vehicular emission is being implemented by Kenya Meteorological Society, of course with support from the other project partners and Kenya Meteorological Department. This component, as I've mentioned earlier, of modeling the spatial dispersal of vehicular emission pollutants is being implemented in Nakuru County Government and Nairobi City County Government. Great. So allow me to give a brief background about today's webinar. So the webinar will seek to discuss the best practices for vehicular pollution emissions inventory and lessons learned for Kenya. Issues that will be discussed will include, and not limited to, what is the status of vehicular emissions inventory in Kenya, who are the key actors in the sustainability of vehicular emissions inventory in Kenya, what are the gaps that need to be addressed, what are the opportunities of having black carbon and other vehicular pollutants inventory in Nairobi and all the major cities in Kenya. So the webinar will also discuss the impacts of vehicular pollution emissions on climate change in Kenya, the potential role and impact of weather and climate factors on vehicular pollution emissions in urban areas in Kenya. Looking at how does weather influence the dispersal of vehicular pollution emissions in urban areas. So allow me at this time to hand over the session to Dr. Richard Mwita, who's going to moderate the next session and invite the panelists. Dr. Mwita is the chairman of the Kenya Meteorological Society. Is also the senior assistant director at the meteorological service at Kenya Meteorological Department, and also acts as a principal investigator for this component of the project. Welcome, Dr. Mwita, and welcome everybody to this webinar series. Asante.
Thank you very much, Arnold, for that very good introduction to the project and to this webinar. As said, I'm Richard Mwita, and I would wish to welcome all of you to this particular webinar today. I'm very excited that we will talk about things that are very close to our hearts. And so, without much ado, I also want to bring to your attention that we also have other participants who you may not see from the, the photographs or the pictures you see here, but they are all attending this particular webinar. And as well spoken, mine is quite simple. We have a number of speakers, panelists. Actually, we have 3 panelists, but since one has not joined yet, but we hope that as we proceed that he'll be able to join us. So first things first, I wish to introduce Professor John Mudhama, who is a professor of meteorology and currently is a director at the Wangari Maathai Institute. Our other panelist or speaker is Professor Michael Gatari. Is a very, very experienced nuclear scientist. He's a professor at the University of Nairobi at the Institute of Nuclear Science. And when I looked at his CV, actually, I couldn't even read it out here. He's really done a lot, and I was even very much excited to see that he was also in the military for 9 good years and retired at the level of a captain. That's really a great achievement, Professor Gatari. So we also have Beo Ogea, who has not joined us, but he works with the Stockholm Environmental Institute, and so we hope he'll join us. So our first speaker today will be Professor Mudhama, who will actually double and speak about the status of vehicular emission in Kenya, and at the same time also give us more about the relationship or the linkages between weather, climate, and meteorological aspects and vehicular emissions. And kindly take a charge, Professor Mudhama. We are going to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mwita and colleagues, Professor Gatari, and the rest of us. Indeed, it's an honor, and I thank the organizers for inviting us to share our experiences in this area. So I go straight to the presentation on the status. Status of the vehicular emission. So I am projecting now. I believe we are able to see the slides.
So Prof, excuse me, maybe you can blow it off using the, you can zoom it out, just on the right, just there's a cap at the bottom.
Yes, I'm looking for it.
Yeah, I think it's at the right bottom panel, the one indicated in, I think, in red, just
Yes.
next to the, exactly there. Exactly.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I think that exactly. Thank you.
So I want to touch on four things, basically by introducing, and then we look at, when we talk about vehicular emissions, we are talking about vehicles, and we are talking about fuel consumption. And in the context of this project, as has been introduced, we are basically looking at black carbon in that connection. And then we see if they say, what kind of relationships would we see in terms of vehicles and black carbon? And what are the methods of continuously estimating vehicular air pollution? So the first question we would want to ask ourselves, how sustainable is the increase in the number of vehicles in Kenya? Now, using data from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, latest 2019, the vehicles registered in Kenya have different categories, and they are listed here. We have the motor and motorcycles, we have motor vehicle utilities, lorries, buses, trailers, and others. Now, a simple projection or trend analysis is shown to the right. We are starting from 1980 up to present. And it is interesting, from the KNBS, or Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, the list actually goes from 1930s, and that is very interesting. It helps us to understand what is happening. So we see an exponential growth in terms of the number of vehicles that are registered. So the question we're asking ourselves, if this continues like this, where do we stop? Now, connected to this, of course, in terms of fuel consumption, again, from the records of Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, we have data on fuel consumption. Monthly data is available. And when you talk about fuel consumption, again, there are different categories. We have light diesel, we have petrol. In KNBS, it's called motor spirit. We have kerosene, we have heavy diesel oil, aviation gasoline, and we also have the totals. And the projections are showing us that there's a continuous increase, yeah, of this fuel. These ones, we are starting from 2011 up to last year. And there's that linear trend that is clearly evident. Now, in terms of understanding, especially the SLCPs, black carbon, one way of understanding this, and as much as, of course, there are different methods, use of satellite technology helps us to get a good estimation. It has its advantages, it has its challenges. So the projection that I put here, in the interest of time, these are just basically monthly values of a black carbon surface mass concentration from the MERA satellite of the MODIS. This is NASA, National Atmospheric Space Administration. And it's an estimate that helps us to understand where we are at. Yeah, of course, we recognize there are the usual challenges and limitations, but this helps us to understand. So we have monthly values. What do I mean by monthly values? You take the black carbon for January, and here we are starting from 1980 up to present. Then you get February from 1980 up to present. And the pattern, what we are seeing is that there's a gradual increase. Irrespective of now the variability, there's actually gradual increase in black carbon. So the vehicles are increasing, the consumption, fuel consumption is increasing, and the black carbon is also increasing. Now, this one is an example for Nairobi. Of course, it is possible to do for different counties in Kenya. And for this purpose, I've projected the one for Nairobi. And at a later stage, I think I projected for elsewhere just to show for completeness. Now, I just want to show now, particularly for Nairobi, and I'm comparing now with the Voi town, Nairobi city and Voi town. Voi being to the left and the Nairobi to the right. The patterns show that, of course, the magnitudes are different. The concentrations are different if you look at the graph. When we are talking of to the region of 0.1 micrograms per cubic meter, they are low, and we would want to see them as because they are average, but there is variability from the void to the right. The variability is higher than the one for Nairobi, but the general pattern of increase seems to be evident. And this is an illustration, of course, it is possible to do for different places. The key message here is that there is an increase. And if there's an increase, we need to do something about it. Yeah, of course, we can see, and this is expected, especially 2020, there's a marked decline that is being reported in literature, of course, because the sources of pollution certainly were emitting less, or are emitting less at some point, especially the February-March period. So we thought now we need to relate this. Is there really a connection between vehicular emissions and black carbon levels? And I'm just showing illustrations here. And this is again for Nairobi. For January and February, this is a scatter plot where you have the number of vehicles as the x-axis, and then the y-axis is the black carbon. Now, the January is an interesting one because the R squared, or the variance explained, is 40%. So in other words, basically just talking about the number of vehicles, I mean the vehicular emission, and here we are talking about the total, the emission from vehicles and the levels of black carbon explain 40% of the variability. So that becomes extremely important for us. And this, of course, because it changes, it's affected by seasons, it's affected by weather conditions. Looking at January, the variability that is explained by the coefficient of determination drops to about 24.7%. Yeah. I go to, and I'm just illustrating a few of them. The month of March, it jumps to 50%, the variability that is explained. And in April, it comes to 50%. And this is an indication that vehicular emission and black carbon, there is a significant relationship. So the emissions from vehicles are actually contributing to the levels. So that is an important thing for us to keep in mind. Now, one of the realities, of course, when we deal with the air pollution, there is the place of modeling. Modeling in the sense that for us to be able to understand the complexity of these issues, when you want to diagnose and you want to predict the distribution of pollutants, take an example, a street junction. There are many complex things that need to be understood, like, for example, the so-called streets intersections and canyons. And because of this complexity, including also the meteorological factors, there are several key things that must be brought into play for us to be able to project either spatial distribution of pollution or even temporal distribution. 4 of them, one of them is we must know the vehicular emissions. We must know the so-called wake effect. This is the circulation around a building, and also the canyon wind flow, the channeling of wind along certain streets. And then there's a turbulence that comes in, and this becomes very important for us to do the modeling. So this means as much as we do measurements, because we cannot measure everywhere, but we would want to understand if it is in a city, we cannot have instruments measuring everywhere, but we can actually project with an understanding of what is happening within, especially as regards the vehicular emissions and also the atmospheric processes, so that we can get a good estimation. So I want to use an example because I was checking around for pollution modeling studies, and I know there are several, but the one that I could quickly get was one on odor pollution in Nairobi, Washuka, 2017. And this is, the study was to look at seasonal distribution of odor or smell using the so-called hybrid single particle Lagrangian integrated trajectory, or the I-split dispersion model, which is an open source model. And the study, of course, used archived meteorological data. These are graded data on wind speed and direction, temperature and humidity, because those ones must come in as model inputs. And I just want to illustrate how this came up. Excuse me. Yeah, this is the one. And this was a study on the issue here was a concern about Kahawa West. There was a concern from the public about smell from the sewerage. So this was actually a response to understand how is the smell distributed and what can be done about it. And I'm just showing now the projection. So the center to your left, the center of the shading of all these circles is where now the source of the smell was. And using this model, now using the wind data, using the temperature data, and all the other parameters, together, of course, with the emissions, it is possible to project. So you can see the projection here was that the smell was going to the left. And this was in January 2016. And July 2015, it was being transported probably further because of atmospheric conditions. So this is an indication that similarly, it is possible for us to understand black carbon in this context. I was not able to immediately get a study on black carbon. I know there are researchers who are working on a few things, but this is an illustration of the potential of modeling this. Now, coming now to a question that I would want to pose. Is it possible to continuously monitor vehicular emissions? Of course, we have lessons to learn from around the world. And one of the challenges that always comes is financial or resource issues. But that notwithstanding, with the capability, the current capability of modeling, it is possible for continuous monitoring because we need the grounds measurements. We also supplement with the satellite measurements. And now when we add the modeling, it is possible for us to come up with the continuous air quality monitoring, which is extremely important. And I've given an example here. I chose, you may bear with me, one may look at it like it's a bit selfish. The roundabout, Uhuru Highway and University Way, at 8 a.m. on, I think this was 12th of July, to the right. So when you have vehicles there and they are emitting, in this case, I put some vehicles emitting 50 micrograms per meter cubed. And what would have been the pattern? Where were the pollutants going to? When you put to the model, you find that they were actually being projected northwards, as you see from the presentation on the right, and spreading to the west and to the east. So there's the transport, and there's also the dispersion. And this is using now the I-split model. Now, it is possible to monitor many different places and be able to come up with information that can help in decision making. So basically, this is a point that I picked. It is possible to pick different points within a city or within an urban area and project and come with information. Now, the input that is required here, of course, we need the emissions. The measuring of the emissions is important. If it is not possible, then we can find a way of estimating. Then now, the input of meteorology, because it's important, we have the satellite data, the gridded data that is being used from around the world. It is better than nothing. Of course, in the absence of ground truth information, then the satellite data becomes important in that context. So in terms of way forward, certainly air quality management and governance system is necessary for continuous monitoring and evaluation. So we need to invest in air quality management and governance. This is something that is critical. And there is need for operational modeling in air quality. I'm using the word overdue. Many countries around the world, this is something that is already available, be it from the public sector or even private sector. This is an area that, because there are many benefits to this. So this brings me to the end of the presentation. I want to acknowledge, of course, the MODIS mission scientists and the associate personnel for production of the data that we used from their website, the NASA website. Thank you very much. This is the first presentation. So with your guidance, Dr. Muita, do I stop there or I pick the next presentation?
Thank you very much, Professor Mudama, for your very elaborate presentation. I guess we have learned so much. And I'm glad that we also have other panelists who have joined during the presentation. And so at this juncture, I would just request you to maybe just pause there for a moment, because we want to request for some questions in case there are questions from the panelists, as well as the attendees in this particular webinar. So kindly, you can present your question on the chat, on the Zoom webinar. So at the moment, I can see that there are some comments on the panel. And then perhaps maybe I can request for any question at this juncture before I read the comments out. There is one comment from one Christopher Olude, one of our attendees, says that the Kenya Meteorological Department has a mobile pollution monitoring van or truck. And then the question he asks is whether can that the data collected from the truck be used in this particular project. Then we also have another question, but maybe perhaps, Prof, if you are privy to that information, can the mobile pollution monitoring truck and the data collected be used for this particular project?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Muita. The answer is, and thank you, Dr. Olude, for that question. The answer is yes. The mobile monitoring equipment are extremely useful. It is possible to measure quite a number of parameters, not only the SLCPs, but the so-called criteria pollutants and other types of pollutants. Because you may want to, you want to agree with me that when you want to understand black carbon, you may not want to just measure black carbon alone, because you want to understand the connectivities. So this mobile vehicle would certainly prove useful. I think one of the challenges that we have had, and I'm talking partly from experience, is sometimes the costs. Apart from the project, it is okay. But on an operational basis or for response to community needs, the costs becomes a big challenge to this. But for the project, certainly this is doable. But we still need to see how sustainable this can be done. And I'll give a simple example. There was a concern, and Professor Gattari is also privy to this, and probably many of us, from an estate within the city. And they were concerned about pollution at night. So there was a factory that was emitting at night. And when you send somebody to go and measure, of course, probably they are privy, but that's why I'm talking about governance. They switch off their systems. So you go, you say there's nothing, but immediately they go, people cannot sleep, yeah, because this requires continuous measurements. So now they wanted a situation whereby we can have equipment continuously measuring for a season of time. So when we computed the costs, especially where you are talking of the mobile equipment, the community felt probably yes, as much as it is very important, it was becoming a bit overwhelming. And these are the issues that probably we are dealing with right now in the city of Nairobi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And then quickly, there is a question from one of the panelists, and this is, what was the hourly rate of dispersal for the Uhuru Highway study that you presented?
Now we used now to go more technical, because we are looking at Gaussian dispersion modeling, and ideally, because the assumptions that we make, for it to be optimized, you need to do 10 minutes, a maximum of 10 minutes, so that you minimize the errors. So you can do a series of 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 6 times. So this is what we did. 10 minutes, it is only 1 hour, yeah, but in that we are talking of slots of 10 minutes, yeah.
Thank you, Prof. I think for me, I'll just add a little. Since the study used a Gaussian kind of distribution, which is largely linear, is there room maybe within the high slip model to maybe integrate a non-linearity or non-linear distribution? Because we know in nature it is quite difficult to have, purely linear distribution in, there's a kind of patterns, whether it is meteorological, whether it's pollution, and so on.
Yeah, thank you. Now, this is a name that is just, the interpretation is by coincidence. The model doesn't use a linear pattern. It's called Gaussian, but it is, it's already called integrated parcel trajectory. And from the illustration that I've shown, from the picture that I have shown, you can actually see what is happening there is not, it's trying to mimic what is happening in reality. So it is capturing the non-linear parameters. Now, of course, as you would agree with me, anytime you do modeling, there's a set of assumptions. Any model will have a set of assumptions. So for you to be able to move forward, you make a set of assumptions. For this particular one, there is nonlinear pattern that is captured, but I still need to mention that, of course, if somebody is interested more in this, there's a list of, I think there are 6 or 7 assumptions that one must keep in mind when you are using the results for this particular one. Of course, the other models, I'm using iSplit because it's open source. It can be used, I believe, operationally with the minimal resource issues that have become an hindrance over the years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think we will stop it at that. And panelists, attendees, if you have any additional questions, please post them at the chat that's provided on the right panel of your screen. And finally, we just going to introduce a few of the panelists who have joined us during the presentation. And I'm happy to welcome Jane Akumu, who works with the United Nations Environmental Program, if I'm right. And maybe Jane, because we have been communicating, but I was not able to get to hear from you, please kindly just maybe say one word to the panelists so that they can also know you, and if possible, they can also see you. They don't know how you look like, possibly they'll be happy to.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for organizing this webinar, quite important. And it's unfortunate that we were not able to communicate, so I do not have a presentation, but just quickly, this is quite an important topic, not just for Kenya. Globally, it's something that we've been following up as a United Nations Environment Program, because as you know, black carbon is quite an important short-lived climate pollutant, and that's why we are discussing it today. So it is important when it comes to meeting the Paris Agreement. It's also important when it comes to health issues, because a component of it is actually, the small particles that are harmful to health. So addressing black carbon is actually good for, for us, for health, and also for the environment. And there are solutions, and I'm glad to note that in Kenya already solutions in the transport sector are being implemented, which includes moving to low sulfur fuels. As you know, as a sub-region, from 2015, the sub-region adopted low sulfur fuel standards at 50 ppm. But what is actually being imported now is 10 parts per million, which is quite very clean fuel. That's the same fuel that is sold even in Europe. The sub-region also, at a sub-regional level, we're working on vehicle emission standards. More could be done, because what the sub-region is actually discussing, and Kenya as well, is a Euro 4 vehicle emission standard. But we know that we need to transition to at least Euro 6 vehicle emission standards to be able to actually get the full benefits of black carbon reduction. So we hope to see these changes coming in, and working mainly with the heavy duty vehicles, the trucks, the buses, which are really the big contributor of this black carbon in the country and also in the city. So thank you for that. Just a quick comment or intervention.
Thank you very much, Jane Akumu, and it's a great pleasure seeing you. And there are quite a barrage of questions still coming on the same topic. Either Jane or Prof may take the opportunity to answer. So quickly, in the month of July, Prof, there was a spike, on the black carbon graph that you showed. Do you have a quick answer to that? What would be the reason? Why July and not the other months?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Muita. Again, we need to do proper analysis, because that's a research question, and I would want to avoid to speculate. But the possible reasons that would be attributed to this is particularly when we talk about turbulent air conditions and calm conditions. Yeah, when we have calm conditions, wind conditions, then you would expect the concentrations to be elevated in a given location. So that would be a possible reason why you would have elevated levels. If the winds are not strong and the emission is continuing, then that can be possible. It needs to be verified, again, of course, using both satellite and ground truthing so that we can fully understand. I think there are many unknowns, but that would be my starting point of understanding this kind of spike. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So to you, Jane, perhaps you can give us some countries that perform maybe continuous monitoring of vehicular emissions, if you are aware of any. And on top, maybe you can also help us to understand maybe what are maybe the basic methods that we can use, or what are the equipment that you have come across or heard about that are basically used to, to measure vehicular emissions in urban areas.
Thank you for that. I think I'd leave it to, I see Professor Gitari was actually, is a specialist and has been involved in that. But definitely, yes, there are countries that are doing, continuous monitoring. I would actually say maybe like a country like Ghana, which has stations that are, placed along roadside. They have monitoring continuous stations that are in residential areas and industrial. So that way they are able to compare where the pollution is coming from. And more recently, actually, if you look at the international world, they are doing remote sensing. They're using remote sensing technology to do vehicle emission. And this is one of the things that we're trying to see, whether we can also get this into the country and into this region, where you just, do remote sensing, have equipment along the roadside, infrared lights, and you're able to monitor vehicle emissions. But that has to be tied very closely with the vehicle registration, because you can imagine you're monitoring, knowing that this number plate of vehicle, this is what it emitted. So you need to be able to tie it back to who's the owner of that vehicle. So that's something that we're trying to see whether we can actually bring it into the country to help with the monitoring. But I think that's a question that Professor Gitari would actually answer quite well.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll remember to ask Professor Gatari once I give him the opportunity to present, to also give us, some highlights on that.